Imagine this. You retire at 62 with $3 million saved, and you've done everything right on paper. But just a few years in, something shifts. Inflation rises, markets drop, healthcare costs go up, and you start wondering, is my plan really built to last? How much can I comfortably spend per month in retirement? Now, this story isn't uncommon. Two people can start with the same nest egg and end up in very different places, all because of how they planned. And that's what we're unpacking in today's video through the story of David, a real client of mine who was about to retire with $3 million and what he thought was a plan until life challenged every part of it. I'm Brandon Clark, a certified financial planner and certified private wealth advisor, and I've helped hundreds of high net worth clients turn strong portfolios into confident, flexible retirements. In today's video, we'll walk you through why even a $3 million portfolio can feel fragile without a plan that adapts. We'll also discuss how to design a spending strategy that flexes with life and the market. And finally, how David shifted from quietly scaling back his lifestyle to creating a dynamic retirement plan. One that not only guides how much he can safely spend, but also helps him leave $1 million legacy to his kids and make smarter tax decisions along the way. Now, as always, the information discussed in these videos is strictly educational and for illustrative purposes only and should not be taken as financial or tax advice. So, David's story is powerful, and you might even see parts of yourself in it. For 4 decades, he thrived as a Fortune 500 executive, living life by the numbers, managing risk, solving problems, and staying composed under pressure. But as his 62nd birthday approached, the biggest decision of his life wasn't one that he could spreadsheet his way through. This one was extremely personal. 5 years earlier, David lost his wife, Sarah, to cancer. Before she passed, he promised her that he wouldn't grind forever. And at 62, he'd walk away and live the life that they had planned. One of their dreams was to travel to Japan, but Sarah got sick before they could ever go on that trip. Now, from a financial standpoint, he checked almost every box. Since his 20s, David saved diligently, building a $3 million portfolio. And David holds about $800,000 in a brokerage account and $2.2 million in his IRA rollover. His home was valued at $2.1 million, but it isn't part of the plan to fund his retirement. He essentially has no plan on selling it because this is where he had raised his children and his family still gathers here. His plan was simple: retire at 62, collect Social Security at full retirement age of $3,900 a month, draw $120,000 a year with the 4% rule, enjoy golf and travel in California, and leave about $1 million to his kids, clean and tax-free. Those were his main goals. But this wasn't just a financial goal. It was a mission to honor his wife, protect his health, and give his children the security that his own parents couldn't fully provide. Then life got complicated, like it always does. In the years leading up to retirement, lifestyle creep set in, more upgrades, more vacations, more generous gifts, healthcare costs climbed higher than expected, and then came 2022. Inflation surged, both stocks and bonds plunged, and his portfolio shrank. And David had been here before, at least emotionally. He remembered the fear in his father's eyes during the financial crisis, and he swore he'd never end up in the same place. Yet here he was, portfolio down, expenses fixed, and a legacy somewhat at risk. He hadn't run out of money, but his confidence was starting to slip. So, like many do, he went ultra conservative. He changed his allocation to about 50% bonds, 50% equities. And for a moment, it felt safe. But deep down, he knew safety wasn't the same as certainty. By early this year, with the market trending higher, David's confidence was finally back. But this time, he wanted more than reassurance. He wanted precision. He knew that just because his plan looked safe didn't mean that he was doing it in an optimal way. He wasn't willing to step into retirement with uncertainty lurking in the background. Now, his main question: how much can I comfortably spend in retirement and still achieve all of my goals? What David didn't realize was that 3 silent forces were working against him. First, he never truly calculated his monthly lifestyle cost. He followed a static rule when what he needed was a dynamic roadmap, one that flexed with his life using guardrails, not guesses. What we did together was we itemized fixed expenses, variable spending, and goals like travel and golf, plus healthcare costs before Medicare. And I'll show you how we did this in a moment. Second, his conservative allocation, while potentially comforting at times, was limiting his ability to spend confidently. At his lifestyle level, that meant 50-50 between stocks and bonds, meant he'd potentially outspend his portfolio, or at least not leave behind the meaningful legacy that he was striving for, even with the 4% rule. And finally, his legacy plan risks creating tax headaches for his kids. A large portion of his wealth sat in pre-tax retirement accounts. Yes, it grew tax deferred, but with the 10-year depletion rule for inherited IRAs, his children would face a tax web. So he wanted to optimize this as much as possible. If you're listening to David's story and thinking parts of it sound familiar, well, you're not alone. These are the exact challenges we uncover in our profit process. If you want clarity around how much you can spend, how to protect your legacy, and how to avoid blind spots that derail retirement, you can use the link in the description to schedule a complimentary discovery call. So after running the numbers, David had about $108,000 a year in expenses. In addition to that, we earmarked $20,000 a year for international travel and $15,000 for his country club. And both of these brought joy and social connection, so somewhat non-negotiables. So a total of $143,000 a year. Now, we ran both travel and golf into his early 80s and then dropped off those expenses. Now, some of you may be thinking, these expenses seem pretty high. The reason is he lives in one of the highest cost of living cities, not just in the US, but in California. He loves to eat out, and his property taxes are fairly high. Now, one of the tools we use within our financial planning process is Right Capital. We'll start with this, and then we'll discuss the guardrails approach and the software that we use there. So before we did anything with the plan, what we did is we created an itemized expense list for David. What that means is we had him fill out our lifestyle retirement workbook. And at the very end, he filled out his expenses for each category. So personal and family expenses, vehicle expenses, home expenses, and even personal insurance expenses. So after filling all of this out, we had a much clearer roadmap for what his expenses were going to be now and what that will be over time adjusted for inflation. This is the area, the expenses, where people dread filling this out the most, but it's often one of the most, if not the most important part of the retirement planning process. Think about it this way. I often tell clients, would you trust putting your hard-earned dollars into a business? Would you invest in a stock in a business that didn't track its own expenses? Probably not. You want to approach your personal expenses in the same manner. So if we bring it back to the Right Capital plan, we can see here that based on his current plan, he has about a 60% probability of success. So not great. Like I've talked about before, that sweet spot is about 75 to 80%. Let's say that his probability of success is 80%. That would mean that there's only a 20% chance that he'd have to make any adjustments throughout retirement, so pretty minimal. Now with 60%, well, one, we want his ending value to be above $1 million for his legacy planning for his kids. But secondly, a 60% probability of success means that there's about a 40% chance that adjustments will need to be made. Not great. So going down here, like we've discussed, we itemized his expenses, which ended up being closer to $9,000. But the issue was he had not factored in pre-Medicare health insurance up until age 65. So we factored that in at $8,700 a year. Then in addition to that, we added $20,000 for travel, $15,000 for his golf membership, and of course, that $1 million legacy for his kids. In addition, we factored in about $106,000 per year for the last 3 years of his retirement plan before he passes away and becomes an angel for long-term care costs. And all of these numbers are adjusted for inflation over time. So we can see after tweaking that monthly expense to $9,000 a month with all of these itemized goals factored in, we can see that the probability of success changes pretty nicely. It goes up to about 73%. Pretty good. Now, of course, not in that sweet spot that we want of 75 to 80% plus. We did do a separate Social Security analysis for David, and we found that him collecting at full retirement age 67, made the most sense for his situation. So one other factor that plays into his overall success is around his investment allocation. So his current allocation has about 50% in stocks, 50% in bonds. Now, with this fairly conservative allocation, there's an assumed rate of return of about 7%, 7.3% based on this software, which does have its limitations. So outside of this software, we generated a risk analysis specifically for David. We stress test periods like the financial crisis, tech bubble, COVID, the inflation spike in 2022, to see what David would be comfortable with as a temporary decline. Because at the end of the day, risk is just a way of saying volatility, especially if you're going into diversified stock funds. So what we decided on was about a 65 stock, 35 fixed income portfolio, which assumes about an 8.8% annual rate of return. And as you can see here, the difference between his current allocation and the proposed allocation is about 1.5% more per year as an assumption. That can be a lot. That adds up due to compound interest. 1.5% per year may not sound like a lot, but over the course of a 15, 20, 30-year retirement, that can mean hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars more in net ending value. So what we did is we changed the allocation to that 65-35 blend, and that got him to the sweet spot, 84%. Now, outside of just these metrics, probability of success and Monte Carlo, we got very granular with his cash flow assumption. We said, okay, you have an 84% probability of success. That's great. But what does that mean on an itemized cash flow level? What is that going to look like annually? So what we did is we mapped it out. You can see here at age 62, his expenses are in this category here. We've got his goals. We've got his low tax payment, which we'll come back to in a moment, which shows on the furthest right-hand column the net cash flow, essentially the after-tax amount that he needs to pull out of his portfolio to live the life that he wants to live in retirement. And you can see how that trends down until Social Security kicks in, at which point his net flows begin to drop up until the age of 75, when his mandatory distribution, his RMD, kicks in, which at that point generates a positive cash flow. It gets reinvested into a taxable brokerage account to continue to grow. Now, one thing that we immediately noticed was these few years with essentially no income, what can we do to capitalize on that? Well, Roth conversions are one component that we can take advantage of. The reason being is that he's going to be in the lowest tax rate environment that he'll probably ever be in. Hence this chart here. This is his effective tax rate. It's essentially how much he's paying in taxes based on his total income. So the marginal tax rate, people think, oh, if I'm in the 24% bracket, I'm paying 24% in taxes. Not quite. You're only paying 24% on a portion of your income. So by using the effective tax rate, you get a better understanding of, again, what you're paying in taxes as a percentage based on your income. So we can see here, based on the chart, it very much shows that he's in the lowest tax rate that he'll ever be in until Social Security starts to be collected. And then, of course, those mandatory distributions kick in. So what we did is we ran a analysis looking at opportunities to do a Roth conversion. So what we found was that if David filled up the 12% bracket, that was the most optimal for his situation, which means that by filling up the 12% bracket and utilizing those Roth conversions, he'd have about $600,000 more in tax-adjusted ending assets. He would have paid about $460,000 less in taxes over the course of his retirement, and he would have had to take out about $1.4 million less in withdrawals from those tax-deferred accounts. And we played around with it. We said, okay, what if we do the 10% bracket? What if we fill up that bracket entirely? How would that impact the plan? And not bad, but it wasn't that optimal spot. The optimal spot was 12%. So with the detailed analysis, we can see at age 62, all the way up until about 74, so roughly a little over 10 years, this is what the plan is saying that he should be converting per year into that Roth IRA, that tax-free bucket. And you can see here on the right-hand column that it's growing. That tax-free account is growing very nicely. Now, the plan is saying that he should be withdrawing from the taxable brokerage account to help pay for the conversion. And you can see down here that eventually the plan is saying that he actually should be taking some funds out from the Roth IRA later on in retirement, so around 69 to 70. Typically, plans say spend down the taxable account first, then the tax deferred, then the Roth IRA. But for David's situation, the most optimal plan is to take a small portion from the tax-deferred account, as well as from even the Roth IRA until RMD age, at which point he just takes the mandatory distribution amount out, and then he'll have an after-tax savings, which he'll reinvest into the taxable brokerage account, and he lets the tax-free bucket at that point just continue to compound and grow very nicely. Now, shifting gears to the guardrails approach, how much can David spend when the market goes up as well as when the market goes down? So the baseline amount is $12,000 per month. And again, this is factoring in that legacy plan of $1 million for his kids. We can see here, if he spends $12,000 per month, that is a reasonable amount. If he notices an increase in the portfolio, and we see about a 34% increase, so $1 million growth, he can actually increase his spending to a little over $16,000 per month. Now, if the portfolio drops and we experience a pretty severe decrease, about a third of the portfolio goes down, well, then in turn, he can spend $11,400, which is about a $600 decrease. So not that severe. Since a big goal of David's was to avoid a period like the financial crisis, similar to what his dad had experienced, our objective is to plan for a period similar to that. Because quite frankly, it's not a matter of if another 30, 40, 50% decline will happen. It's a matter of when. So we need to prepare for those black swan events. So what we do here is we show David, okay, look, if we see another period like the global financial crisis, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. You will have to make adjustments over time. You will have to reel back spending a bit, but not as though you're cutting your spending down by 50%, maybe a couple $1,000s. Maybe you don't take that extravagant trip to Europe. Maybe you don't go out to those fancy dinners and you just reel it back temporarily. And quite frankly, everyone during this period is reeling back spending. So we can see that there is a lower guardrail that comes into play, but over time, as the market recovers, he can go back to spending more very comfortably. And last but not least, if we look at his portfolio, the withdrawal rate as a percentage, and for some more analytical clients, sometimes that registers better, we can see that early on in retirement, he's about 5%. So not that 4% static withdrawal rate. And then once Social Security kicks in at full retirement age, it drops to roughly 3.5%. And then eventually it increases back up over time until, of course, that big increase you see there is for the legacy gifting for his kids once he passes away. So what changed? Well, to get David to a comfortable spot and provide more clarity around how much he can comfortably spend, we first categorized David's spending into essentials. So housing, Medicare premiums, healthcare out of pocket, and then discretionary items like travel, gifting, and of course, his country club membership. Then we mapped out these expenses against his income sources. So outside of Social Security at 67, the rest of his income is coming from portfolio withdrawals. And that's where the guardrails system came in. We set a withdrawal rate of roughly 3 to 5%. So if markets perform well, David had the ability to enjoy more. So he could travel more, family trips, some upgrades. But when returns lagged, the plan automatically adjusted, prioritizing essential expenses and legacy first. We also ran Monte Carlo simulations. We modeled inflation spikes and stress tested long-term care events. Each time, our focus was clear. We wanted to maintain David's desired lifestyle while preserving that $1 million legacy target. We also implemented a plan of Roth conversions during the first 10 years of retirement before those mandatory distributions kicked in, keeping his future tax brackets low, as well as maximizing that tax-free legacy for his kids. Now, every year we will revisit the plan. We'll update his expenses, we'll run new projections, and we'll adjust spending accordingly. Our game plan is not to guess, but to measure and update regularly. The results? His plan's probability of success rose from about 60% to the mid-80s. And most importantly, David didn't feel deprived. As he put it himself, I'm not spending less, I'm actually spending more, just now spending more strategically. So if you want to understand how your retirement strategy supports both the life you want to live now and in the future, as well as potentially a legacy, you can click the link below to run your own retirement guardrails analysis. Together, we'll break down your income streams, your retirement goals, and your legacy priorities using our firm's profit process. Through this process, you'll walk away with a dynamic plan, one that evolves with you rather than just gathering dust in a drawer. So feel free to click the link in the description to schedule your free discovery call. We'll show you where you stand, what adjustments you might need to make today, and how to retire with true confidence. Because the sooner you run your numbers, the sooner you'll know if you're on track to live well today and still leave behind the future your family deserves. So here's what I want you to remember. A big portfolio alone won't give you peace of mind in retirement, and it certainly won't guarantee a lasting legacy. Your fixed expenses, your lifestyle choices, and especially market timing can all quietly erode what you leave behind. If you found this video helpful, feel free to hit that subscribe button to see more content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching and looking forward to seeing you in the next video.